This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. This is podcast episode 223, and joining me remotely from Wisconsin, from Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin in particular, is Matt Sampson, director of brewing operations for Hacienda Beer Company and Door County Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jamie. Really appreciate it.
We've written over the years about Hacienda. Well, actually, not much about Hacienda, but definitely about Door County. It actually goes back to 2016 when we did a breakout brewer story in the magazine. And that breakout brewer story came from a chance meeting in 2015 when we threw an ill-fated beer festival in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, thinking that we could pull this off early on in our own tenure. We spent a whole bunch of money to just put together a fantastic beer festival, and we lost our shirts on it. It was the Harley-Davidson Museum. I mean, it was crazy how much money we lost on that beer festival. But one of the amazingly cool things that came out of it is that we were introduced to Door County. At the time, it was just the Door County brand, and then co-founder brewer Danny McMahon had come down to the festival, brought some mixed fermentation beer, and was like, wait a second, where did this just come from? From this tiny brewery up on the peninsula in Wisconsin. It didn't make sense to us, like how this beer even existed with this kind of polish and flavor. And so, of course, we followed up on that and have been super impressed over the years. Beers from Door County like Punk Ass Cat, an older IPA, scored a 97 in the magazine. There's a recipe for it's a recipe for New England style IPA on beerandbrewing.com from Door County. So it's that context which got me thinking, hey, we should kind of check in. Turns out there's been, over the last couple of years, some changes in the business. Matt, you've become director of brewing operations. You've moved out from, and your own background is fascinating. Background as a chemist, a PhD chemist, but also a creative design, branding, photography kind of background in addition to that chemist background. You started off working in the brew house and doing branding work, and now you're director of brewing operations, and that's a cool kind of career arc. I am looking forward to talking more about that, talking about how you all brew progressive styles of beer as well as mixed fermentation beers and do all of those so well. Before we do that, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, support for this episode comes from BSG and The Malt House by RAR. The Malt House is your online source for cool and exclusive RAR Malting Company gear that you can't get anywhere else. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, socks, glassware, and even gear for your pets. Rep the malt you brew with and look sharp doing it. Take the tradition home at themalthouse.com. That's the malt, HAUS.com. So, Matt, we normally start the podcast off a little bit on you. I'm curious. Talk to me about this arc that took you from PhD chemist working in research and highly technical fields to then making a career switch, jumping into brewing on two sides of that, both in the cellar and brew house, and then also on that kind of marketing branding side.
Yeah, I guess I'll take it back. Went to undergrad for chemistry at University of Illinois in Champaign down there, and then headed out to San Diego to pursue my PhD in chemistry. I went to the University of California, San Diego, up in La Jolla there. A couple of my lab mates were home brewers. I spent a little bit of time kind of shadowing them and kind of dove into home brewing myself while I was getting my PhD. homebrewing was never kind of a thing.
Not a bad place to be if you're interested in craft beer and pursuing a PhD.
Yeah, but like homebrewing wasn't really ever something that stuck fully. Like my homebrew was not top quality, especially when I lived in San Diego and we had all these great craft breweries around. So yeah, I spent my time on the weekends kind of exploring the craft brewing scene out there. I was really into photography at the time out there and still am. But yeah, I moved back to Illinois after getting my PhD. My family still lived there. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, she was from that area too. So we moved back. I worked at Argonne National Lab in the suburbs of Chicago out there. Yeah, I was kind of just trying to get some connection to the craft brewing scene in Chicago. I was kind of over lab science. I was, involved in, pretty technical benchtop lab day to day, and was kind of over it. I was trying just to find any way to break into a craft beer related thing. And it was actually my photography that I connected very briefly with Good Beer Hunting in Chicago. I actually wrote a couple stories for their blog online website and did a story on Second Shift and actually Scratch Brewing. I got to go spend the day at Scratch foraging a beer and went through the whole brewing process with them. That was really
beautiful place. Yeah.
That really just changed my whole perspective on what beer could be, and like really influences what we do at Hacienda, at least on the mixed culture side now. But yeah, then my girlfriend, her family had always vacationed up in Door County throughout her whole life. Her parents were retiring up here. She had an online business with her mom at the time. We decided to make the jump and open a brick and mortar shop for her online business. That's what brought us to Door County. Kind of just quit the lab, and eventually I was getting into drone aerial photography up here. Danny McMahon reached out to me randomly to actually use some of my photographs, my drone photographs, on labels for this new beer brand they were starting called Hacienda. And yeah, I came into the brewery one day. They kind of pitched me on the whole Hacienda concept, talked about how they were starting this new creative brand kind of as a creative outlook for Danny and Kyle Gregorish. And they kind of hinted at the fact that they didn't really have somebody to lead the Hacienda brand, or kind of they wanted a new voice for it rather than what they were doing at Door County Brewing. So I went home after that meeting and kind of was like, wow, I feel like I could offer them at least a little bit with my photography skills. So I felt like I could kind of lead that brand, then use my scientific side to help on quality and slowly work my way into the brewery. And so I just wrote him an email and kind of pitched a brand manager job / quality control. I kind of made up my own beer, just job description for them. And
Matt, you're gonna ruin everybody in the industry when they think, oh, I could have that be one job. QC manager and brand manager. Can I get that into one person? It doesn't exist outside of you. I think that's a singular position. But yeah.
Yeah, but luckily they were like, yeah, actually that's something we think we need. I didn't really know what it was going to turn into, and definitely right at the start, it was mostly focused on starting the Hacienda brand on the right foot, kind of making sure the photography, the artwork, and just all this, the introduction to that brand was what it was supposed to be. And then, yeah, they had a little lab space at the brewery we're in now. We actually brew in a different facility than where Door County Brewing was started. That facility is now our barrel room for the mixed culture beers. But I was able to build out a very small, not expensive lab to help with quality here. And then slowly started working my way in every area of the brewing side, from keg washing to running the canning line to one of the other tasks Danny kind of gave me right away was growing the mixed culture program. They had about 6 oak barrels at that time, and I grew it to about 75. Where it is today. We got three fooders from Foeder Crafters that we really grew out that little brewing space that their old production brewery was in. It's been a wild ride.
And
since.
So then Hacienda took off as this brand that is focusing on mixed culture beers and also focuses on kind of progressive styles, hazy IPA, New England style
For
IPA.
sure.
And those other types of beers, and you've been able to kind of pull both of those together. And then you all even opened up a separate Hacienda taproom down in Milwaukee to kind of serve the brand.
Yeah, it was kind of one of the reasons we started this Hacienda kind of project to begin with was we felt it had a reach greater than just Door County. Door County Brewing was very tied to this peninsula with very approachable beers. When they were at their old production space, Danny was really spearheading like a lot of more experimental new school IPAs at the time before a lot of Wisconsin even knew what like New England IPA was. And then like doing very small mixed culture projects. So he was very progressive in that sense.
But I can imagine the core audience of summer tourists in that peninsula in Door County, that may not be exactly the beer that they were looking for in that scope. No, it makes sense to kind of split those things up and keep that passion going, but also find the customers that you want for the beer that you want to make also. Plus, I mean, Milwaukee needed a cool, hip, modern, progressive.
Yeah, and at the time when we decided Milwaukee, it was really, really booming. Now it's very, I would say, a very progressive beer city. It's really grown in the last few years. But yeah, we're really happy to be kind of put a flag in Milwaukee. It was always one of our favorite places to partner with beer bars down there and bring our Door County small batch beers down there to showcase. So it really made sense to kind of grow that with an actual physical location.
For sure. Well, let's talk about some of the beers. And then, of course, now, you went from QC and brand manager to director of brewing operations and doing a whole lot more, and now overseeing a lot of that as the entire business has morphed from those early days when we first started paying attention to it. I want to talk about some of the beers, probably the Hacienda beers in particular, because I think those are probably of most interest to the folks listening to this podcast here. Before we do that, is your brewery struggling to source or afford berry ingredients? Historic heat waves devastated U.S. berry crops, causing supply to dwindle and prices to skyrocket. That's why brewers are switching over to Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends, which mimic straight concentrates but at a better price point and with more reliable supply. Is it any surprise that Old Orchard's best sellers are raspberry and blackberry flavors? Reclaim your margins. Order your craft concentrates at oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, Brew Monitor from Precision Fermentation is the first real-time comprehensive fermentation monitoring solution. It works with your existing fermentation tanks to track dissolved oxygen, pH, gravity, pressure, temperature, and conductivity in real time from any smartphone, tablet, or PC. Brew Monitor provides detailed insight into your fermentations that helps improve beer consistency, reduce tank time, and increase overall efficiency, saving your brewery time and money. Get started for 30 days risk-free. Visit precisionfermentation.com/brewing. So Matt, talk to me about the core beers of Hacienda. Are there kind of stylistic buckets that Hacienda focuses on? And, of those, talk to me about some of the approaches that you find more interesting that may be of interest to our brewers listening right now.
Definitely focus on IPA and hoppy beer. We probably make 60% IPA, some type of hoppy beer, but we do a ton of mixed culture beer, we put an emphasis on mixed culture beer, and now we're doing spontaneous fermentation with a coolship. That's probably 10% of our production.
Really?
We do a decent amount of that. That's another reason why we try to open that Milwaukee taproom is really, it's a lot easier to sell that beer when you can talk directly to the consumer about those styles. We do 15 to 20% of lager brewing. That's really grown in the last year and a half, I would say. And then we do all sorts of other styles to fill out the rest of that. Decent amount of stouts. I would say more on the line of drinkable pastry inspired stouts. They're not like what pastry stout has become these days, I wouldn't say, but a ton of other whatever kind of creative thing our brewers think of.
Sure. Let's talk about mixed fermentation brewing because, as you mentioned earlier, you took that program from 6 barrels to 70 some odd barrels and, and helped kind of grow and baby it along. As you all set out to create a mark for that mixed fermentation program, talk to me about how, what the genesis was, where it came from, and how you all started to define what kind of mixed fermentation beers you wanted to be known for, and how you then went about putting a kind of Hacienda stamp on that.
Sure. I know Danny was very inspired by Belgian beer. Door County Brewing as a whole was kind of started as a Belgian-focused brand, kind of tying to the Belgian heritage of Door County. I personally loved sour beer and Saison from Belgium as well. So when we kind of set out, Danny and I kind of spearheaded kind of growing that project. We knew we wanted very strong Brettanomyces character, light acidity, but definitely Brett forward first and foremost, and more tropical Brett characteristics than kind of your barnyardy or super funky Brett character. And
I remember that as a kind of a key feature, that when we tasted in 2015 that mixed fermentation beer, the acidity was very low. It was tart maybe, but even then very, very light. And yet it was spritzy with this nice Brett definition to it that didn't feel heavy handed. And there was even a nice like hop component to it that seemed very, very complimentary in this. And it was just beautifully balanced in all of these multiple directions, not, in a kind of a counterpoint, because I think, initial mixed fermentation stuff in America in the early 20 aughts or 20 aughts and 20 teens grew very acid forward quickly. And you all definitely were not following that direction.
Yeah, no, that was definitely the inspiration, was more balanced, drinkable beer that had complex yeast and fermentation profiles. We definitely experienced in that growth of that mixed culture program our own little acidity kind of wave, where we tried to pitch a variety of things. I would say when we started that program, everything had Brett in it. Most of it was almost entirely oak fermented, either in barrels or the foeders. We still don't do a ton of kind of stainless steel primary fermentation for those beers. We haven't seen any detrimental characteristics for just fermenting directly in oak and aging on that yeast.
Sure.
But yeah, we pitched bacteria in some of the barrels too, which in hindsight I probably wouldn't do again if I was going to start that program. But we wanted some acidic beer to blend with. Because of that, we didn't hop things too heavily when we were trying to grow that program. So acidity definitely, our stock got more acidic, I would say, than we were hoping. But now we've kind of tamed that back and dialed it in a lot more, just with hopping rates and primarying with only Brett, or we kind of have a high house Saison blend that we use of yeast, and we're almost always just using those two things and almost never pitching bacteria or a mixed culture that has bacteria in it anymore. Just
Really?
Because we're reusing a lot of the oak, and those foeders have those cultures established, and we get enough acidity from those already established cultures.
Yeah, I remember the stories early on of all of the carboys with different cultures running, kind of simultaneously. I know, and it's interesting to like looking at that phase of brewing now. Um, and it's similar when I talk to a lot of brewers, like we were doing a lot of experimentation and those things, and then we figured out what
Yeah.
worked. And so, watching this kind of evolution of process, like winnowing down, almost as this like, natural selective, kind of process over the last 10 years has been really interesting to see. And that you all, it sounds like, went through the same kind of process, trying a lot of different things and then finding the smaller subset of things that really works for you. And so you mentioned Brett primary fermentation. Do you do a fair amount of Brett primary fermentation?
Yeah. We have a few, maybe 2 or 3 Brett strains that we keep in house. They're all Brett Brooks, but I think Brett Brooks sometimes is considered very barnyardy and funky. All these strains are very tropical fruit forward, more pineapple-y, with kind of even like a sweet tarty, not too acidic character.
How did you get find these specific Brett strains, Brooks strains that produce that kind of flavor? Are they commercially available, or are they just things that you guys have been able to isolate?
No, so the Brett strains are all commercially available, and they're just part of that growth where we kind of tried a bunch of things and settled on a few that we really like the profiles of. Our Saison blend that I also talked about that we do most primary fermentation with is also commercially available. It's a blend, and we also use a different Saccharomyces blend that I did harvest wild from Door County. The first summer I worked here, I went around the county and swabbed fruits and all sorts of flowers and sorts of things. I sent a bunch of those mixed cultures to Jeff down at Bootleg Biology. He actually
Jeff Mello.
Yeah, he isolated a bunch of them and sent them back to us, and we kind of picked only 2 that we really use now, and we use them usually together in a blend in certain beers.
But you've also gone down the coolship rabbit hole and are working on spontaneous beer now.
Yep. That was something that we always wanted to do. I think what they wanted to do from starting Door County Brewing, we're in such a unique kind of environment up here on a peninsula between Green Bay and Lake Michigan. So it just makes sense if we're going to do mixed culture beer, I think to do something spontaneous that really represents the area that we live in. We started brewing coolship beer it'll be 4 years ago in fall, in this coming fall. So we released a blend of 2-year-old coolship beer last year. That was our first 100% spontaneously fermented beer. That was absolute killer beer in both tap rooms. Our system, our brew house up here is just a single infusion brew house, so we don't do any kind of turbid mashing. We don't keep that process very traditional. We do use a decent amount of raw wheat, malted wheat, and Pilsner malt in that grain bill, but we don't claim to do kind of very traditional beer that way. We're just
sure, but are you using any other tricks? Obviously, if are you mashing hot to leave it dextrinous and just what other strategies do you use to kind of make it not turbid mash, but make it longer to ferment for those things to do their work? Yeah,
the only tricks we really use are just using a high content of raw wheat, and then mashing.
When you say high, what is that? like 50-50 or
not quite, maybe 40%. But and mashing hot, as hot as we haven't found. Then we keep bumping it up, I would say, and we haven't really gotten to a point where we found detrimental effects to that. But those are the real only. We don't even use aged hops very much. We use to mimic that classic profile. We use a decent amount of local hops directly in our coolship to kind of give it a different character of our own that we've really liked over the last couple of years in our coolship program. So we'll actually steep local whole cone hops directly in the coolship overnight with the beer. Those have been our favorite batches.
That's interesting. That's not an untraditional method. Maybe not as much with lambic brewers, but certainly in other areas of Europe that used coolships, like hop addition to the coolship is pretty normal. When you do that, I mean, obviously it's harder to calculate IBU contribution and something like that because the time and temperature contact and the volume of that's just weird. But do you have any kind of rules of thumb about how much acidity or how much bitterness is too much and then inhibits the kind of growth of culture and wild yeasts?
We have not. That whole process to us is not very, I would say, dialed in.
How big's your coolship and how much hops go in there?
Yeah, it's a 14 barrel coolship. Our brew house is 15 barrels. We usually use just about 11 pounds of whole cone hops. I would say at a maximum in the coolship, usually a little bit less than that. Those beers we don't really hop for the coolship very, very much. And I would say that's about half of what we've done so far. The other half is more traditional hot side hopping without aged hops. So, but yeah.
Is there something to the Wisconsin hops that provide a flavor contribution that you enjoy outside of just it tastes like Wisconsin?
Yeah, we've used both just local Cascade and local Comet in the coolship. I really enjoy the local Comet character. It has this tropical fruit character, I think, and citrus note that's really pleasant. I really hadn't used Comet before using the local stuff, and it's been super pleasing. We did a wet hopped lager this past season with that Comet as well. That was super cool to use.
I love tasting these variations, and like Michigan Cascades just across the lake from you all, same kind of thing, have their own flavor that's very different from Pacific Northwest Cascades. And I mean, how even Cascades from Washington to Oregon, are a bit different. But I mean, I've loved that kind of berry note that comes out of those Michigan Cascades, and it's fascinating to see that the impact of growing area and environment can have that much flavor and aroma impact just on the same exact hop plant.
Yeah, we use a decent amount of Michigan hops as well. Michigan Chinook is the big one that a lot of people just rave about because of its pineapple character. And we have some core IPAs that use Michigan Chinook and hazy IPA.
So then let's get back to that subject of spontaneous beer. So you're using a slightly modified standard infusion mash process. Sometimes you're coolship hopping. Sometimes you're not doing that. You're not using aged hops. How talk to me about developing that kind of funky character that people expect out of coolship and spontaneous beer. I know from our standpoint, in a lot of ways, those aged hops tend to provide some of the flavor compounds that then get worked on by Brett and other things through that long fermentation process with those. How do you provide that kind of expectation of funkiness if if you're not using some of these things?
Yeah, I don't know if we actually are trying to chase those characteristics. I think we're just trying to showcase local microflora, and we use those local hops and those other batches. We will use more fruit forward hops, just because I personally like the profile, more fruity profile. Less. I do love those aged hop characteristics in those beers as well. But I also think there's something unique about doing it a different way, doing it not chasing kind of that flavor profile. And yeah, we're very clear when we describe those beers what the consumer should expect. And the beers we put out so far don't have a very pronounced aged hop character or that funky character that is associated with them.
That's interesting, and it's I can appreciate that point of view, that it's not trying to be this other thing or trying to be an equivalent of that. And it also sounds like I keep hearing you use the same language of tropical fruit across all of the different kinds of beers that you make, and it seems like it's an interesting approach to say, hey, whether we're making a mixed fermentation, wood fermented farmhouse style beer, whether we're making a spontaneous beer, whether we're making a hazy IPA, these are the kinds of flavor currents that define our brand because this is what we like. That's I think that's a valid artistic and aesthetic approach.
Yeah, and we definitely get funky characteristics from that wild microflora. It's just not the same aged hop derived characteristic that most people are used to in that style.
Sure. No, we get the same kind of funky characteristic out of hazy IPAs that use Southern Hemisphere hops because there are some of the same flavor compounds that stretch there. Tropical fruit has, funky phenolic character, and, there's plenty of ways, all of these things are more complex. And so you're right, it's not just aged hops funk character that gives it. If you wanted to make a beer that tasted just like Belgian Lambic, then yeah, you probably need to do that. But there's no rule that says you have to make it taste like that. Well, I want to dig in a little bit more and talk about process and using these yeasts. Before we do that, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brewhouse to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brewhouses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, are you involved in your local homebrew club? Want to receive even more benefits? Sign up today for 5 Star Chemicals Homebrew Club program. It's free, and you could have the chance to test out new products before they hit the market, receive exclusive swag, and enjoy discounts on brewing cleaners and sanitizers. Head on over to their website to sign up. You won't want to miss it. So you go through this mash process, and maybe we should kind of just focus on mixed culture, kind of pitched culture beers here. Talk to me about how you then, is there anything special in that recipe itself that allows those cultures to shine? And then, as you go then through the fermentation process, what have you found to help you produce the kind of expressive fruit forward flavors in those beers that you all really love?
Yeah. So, just in regular mixed culture beer, we definitely like to use a lot of high protein grain, oats, wheat, spelt, almost all rye. Almost all of our recipes have probably two of those, in addition to Pilsner malt. Just something to give yeast and bacteria something to chew on for a while.
What kind of rough percentage do you find yourself using with those?
Yeah, for the regular mixed culture beer, it's probably around 20-25%, only a combination of those other grains. So nothing crazy. But I really like spelt, particularly in those beers. Rye, just I think pairs really well with mixed culture saison.
What in what way? From a sensory perspective,
just the
what do you get
subtle
from
spiciness, more so than I would say spelt and rye are more in our beers than like oats. But just the subtle spiciness, and maybe it's doing something with our specific Brett strains or bacteria strains that creates some sort of profile that we prefer. I don't know that for sure, but we really like the beers that have those grains in them.
Yeah, so you have a significant component of some of these other high protein grains in there. Obviously, that's going to sit there and let the culture work on it for a longer amount of time. Are there specific hops that you use in those mixed culture beers that help accentuate some of the fruitier flavors that seem to be your typical goal?
Yeah, we like to use a lot of whirlpool hopping with the hot hops that are on the market. Some of our favorite hops for hazy IPA make their way into those beers. There's something
even into your mixed culture beers.
Yeah, there's something really cool about how those hops transform in fermentation with Brettanomyces. I think particularly, we just did a Strata whirlpool hopped foeder beer that just transformed into this really cool character, tropical fruit character. With those Brettanomyces strains. So we've done that with a bunch of different hops, New Zealand hops or Citra Mosaic, Simcoe, some of our favorites from the Pacific Northwest.
What does the hop load look like in the whirlpool, roughly in maybe like pounds per barrel to get some sort of effect? Because you're not trying to overwhelm the beer, but you also don't want those to disappear.
Yeah, we're usually at slightly under a pound per barrel, but pretty close to a pound per barrel. Just using traditional T90s, and that's usually the only hop addition if we're doing that sort of thing for a beer.
And then is there a temperature that you all find you whirlpool at, or are you cooling it down at all, or are you just cutting and whirlpooling?
For those beers, we don't really mess with the temperature. We're cutting and whirlpooling pretty fast. For our hazy IPAs, we do cool the whirlpool down, usually just below like 190, usually settle somewhere between 180 and 190. But we can, I don't know if you want to dive into that whole topic right now, or if we want to stay on this.
Sure. Yeah. No, okay. I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, I love whirlpooling, and we've been talking a lot about it because, of course, cool pooling is all the rage, but figuring out how to, drop temperatures. There's a whole variety of ways to do it. And I was talking to somebody and they were telling me about how they just blow cold air over the top of their kettle and
really?
Drop it down. Like, okay. That's how you do that. Not everybody can do that kind of thing. What is that? How do you all do that?
Yeah. So for our hazy IPAs, we run a whirlpool through our heat exchanger just to get it below 190. We don't want to go super low with it. We did. Right when we started cold whirlpooling and experimenting with that, we did go pretty low. Like we were trying like 160. We didn't notice much difference, at least in sensory, between like right below 190 and going much cooler than that. So just from keeping things clean standpoint, I feel a lot comfortable at 180 to 190 than down lower than that.
That thought of, and as we're talking about that now, I'm thinking about spontaneous brewing. I bet you have a problem that is less common for other spontaneous brewers, and that is temperatures that are too cold to spontaneously ferment in, or at least having to manage the temperature so it doesn't get as cold inside as you're cooling as it might be outside. You can have pretty frigid air temperatures that are significantly below freezing where you are. That would be way too cold for any kind of real spontaneous fermentation. How do you all manage that kind of temperature control?
Yeah, so we just plan it accordingly. We only really produce those beers in spring and late fall. We target between 35 and I would say 45 degrees overnight temperature. We have a little cabin next to our brew house in our beer garden. Actually, that it's a really perfect spot for a coolship. Those old woodworking building, really old like wood beams in that building, and we just open up the windows. We have 5 or 6 windows that we can kind of vary. Do we open all of them depending on the temperature? Do we open only 2? We kind of control the airflow that way, depending on how cold or how hot it is at night.
That makes sense. I got distracted on temperature stuff, but let's talk about, fermentation with your mixed culture, pitched mixed culture beers. As those move through fermentation, you've got to, if you're using a commercial culture, you have a rough idea of where those, are. Do you manipulate temperature in any way through those fermentations to get them to express in a specific way, or you just kind of let them roll?
Yeah, for all of the mixed culture beers, for the most part, unless we ferment in stainless, which we rarely do, we just let it roll. We let it free rise, and we really like that profile. I mean, we do occasional stainless primaries, and we'll control those temperatures, but we really have liked the profile of all those oak direct fermentations.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about fruit additions then. Obviously that's a big piece of this in terms of, especially in that kind of mixed fermentation beer space, of creating interest for consumers, creating, beers that also feel, comfortable and familiar for them, even if they have, some element of them that are, funky or slightly tart or whatnot. Fruit and other kind of spice and ingredient additions are a big piece of that. Where do you all tend to land? If you are moving in that direction and trying to achieve that tropical fruitiness, as we've already talked about, you also don't want to crush some of that natural fermentation, flavor and some of what the culture itself is bringing. How do you, how do you make aesthetic decisions about fruits to add to those, and then how do you go about adding some of those fruits?
Yeah, so for fruiting, I typically just try to source as much as I can find local. We're pretty lucky in Door County. It's like Montmorency cherries it's the capital of
right.
the country for that sort of thing. So we do use some cherries every season. We do a cherry beer, and we just kind of see. I have a couple. Few different farms up here, or growers up here that I've developed relationships with, and I kind of know what they grow every year, and we'll have conversations on what timing with those things look like, and how the crop's doing that year, and what kind of quantities they have. So we use strawberries and peaches, cherries for the most part. A few others, but those are kinds of the local fruit are what I like to focus on, and we kind of try to blend beer according to what fruit we find or what fruit is available. So we'll go through our barrel stock and try to find something that would pair really well with that, rather than kind of tasting a bunch of beers and having a blend and thinking, a fruit would go well with that. It's usually the other way around in our case.
How much does that fruit, because fruit harvests happen in very specific times of the year, And of course, to have mixed fermentation beer, you can finish in a few months or you can finish in 2 years. There's some range there, but depending on how things work in your fermentation, you want to have beer ready at a similar time that fruit's going to come in, because the fruit will never wait. How does that impact, your brewing planning, so that you make sure you have, beer that's ready at the right time with the right kind of, it's in the right place in the process to then add fruit with?
Yeah, that was all kind of a part of this growth on that. That's the mixed culture side. We're always trying to have enough barrel stock to, especially in the summer, so that we have a lot to choose from, a lot of kind of different paints to paint with. But we tend to just really amp up production. We brew more in the winter or the year before, just so we have enough stock ready for that fruit.
How long does your typical fermentation take in a foeder or in a wood barrel where you're doing fermentation in the barrel?
Yeah, so it depends on most of our foeder beers. We try to turn around a little bit quicker, and those I would say are more kind of classic Saison inspired in a way. Although we do these hop profiles and techniques that definitely move it away from that, but those aren't always for fruit. Those are, I would say, 3 to 4 months, maybe 6 months for those types of beers. That's definitely the shortest turnaround
Sure.
that we do over there. For all the barrel fermented beers, I would say 6 to 18 months is kind of the sweet spot. We were doing a lot, some like 2 to 2.5 years right after we grew that program up to like 70 plus barrels. And I definitely don't, the acidity can get out of line the longer you let it age. And I think that was part of the problem with our acidity as well, getting out of hand. So we don't want to let it age more than, I would say, 18 months. And then the spontaneous beer is another story. We kind of get those old, that really mature profile using those spontaneous beers. And we're definitely moving our program into, I would say, more focused on spontaneous beer, especially on the fruit side, kind of pairing those fruits with the local fruits with the locally fermented or naturally fermented beers. We only have a few blending tanks over in that barrel room, so once we put fruit in one of those blending tanks, we gotta kind of let it ferment out and re-ferment. So it's nice to do that with this focus on the spontaneous beers for those kind of projects.
Using fruit from local growers, creates a whole another line of manual work that you typically need to do, from processing those things, to potentially freezing, or cutting in some cases, especially if you're talking about a fruit that's as large as a peach, peeling or removing skin, all of these, pitting sometimes. Talk to me about how with some of those, 3 core local fruits, you all then process and add in order to, get a nice expression out of the beer, but also, say, limit oxygen intake and oxidation and some of the more negative things that can come from when you're adding things into beer.
Yeah. All the fruit is hand processed, and we always use it fresh. We haven't tried freezing anything. We don't have a means to freeze 500 pounds of fruit, but it's all processed fresh. Sometimes for cherries, we simply just throw that in a tank, purge the tank. We really like kind of to allow the cherries to sit in a purged carbon dioxide environment. It's done in the wine industry a lot. Is
sure, a little carbonic maceration.
Exactly, yeah. So that's what we do almost now entirely for cherries. We'll let the cherries start fermenting. We don't always let it go completely carbonic, that whole process, but we'll at least let it start fermenting and then rack beer onto those cherries.
When you say start, like how many days would you let that roll?
Probably at least a month. I think we've done it 1 to 2 months usually, and we really like the results with that.
What from a sensory perspective, what was that kind of cherry
I think
fermentation?
I just like that I think it kind of speeds up the time that you need to let the beer sit on cherries. Cherries is something that I think you could let beer sit on for a year and it would almost get better. But allowing the cherries to ferment before exposure to the beer kind of breaks some of the skin a little bit. Just kind of speeds up that whole process. We still let it sit on the beer for a couple months at least, sometimes 4 or 5 months. But I think if we didn't do that, we would want to let the cherries sit on there for 6 to 8 months. I think you just keep getting more depth of cherry flavor. We don't pit the cherries or anything. I think you get a lot of nuanced kind of almondy, cinnamony kind of characteristics from those pits that are really pleasant in those beers. Something like peaches, we have hand processed those and pitted those and sliced them by hand. We just did a beer where we kind of did what we did with cherries. We didn't go through like a carbonic maceration, but we just threw them in a tank. We left the pits in, and just racked the beer on there, and we let them sit for I think 7 months, and that was the best. It's not released yet; it's still in conditioning in bottles, but that's the most depth of peach flavor we've got in a mixed culture beer so far. That's an ingredient that's really hard to just extract true peach flavor. But I think the pits really contributed some great depth of flavor. People worry about the pits and peaches particularly, just
Sure.
But I've heard of other brewers doing that without any issues. I don't think you extract anything that would harm anybody. But yeah, that's kind of what we've been leaning towards recently, is kind of more whole fruit, not touching it much, and kind of longer exposure and re-fermentation time with the beer. That's what I've really enjoyed recently.
That's a large investment in terms of leaving things in contact for that amount of time in a stainless blending tank of some sort. You have to be committed to let it sit for that amount of time, and it becomes an expensive beer to create then, because tank time is money.
Yeah, we only do a couple a year, and we try to plan it out so that those are kind of the last beers of the kind of season that we make, and we let them sit until around this time of year. Try to package a bunch of beer before that to kind of have stock to release throughout the year.
Well, that's interesting, because the business is a little bit more seasonal. Because you sell so much more beer in the summertime than in the winter, you can kind of take advantage of some of the excess capacity over that winter time.
Yeah, and it's just we always let our bottles and kegs naturally re-ferment over 6 to 12 months usually. Usually because of THP creeps up, and we just got to let that scrub out. That's been we've done a lot. I think we've figured out a lot of things to kind of counteract that, but it still needs 3 to 6 months, I would say, and in the package to really get to a place where you feel comfortable releasing it.
He's just waved the red flag in front of the bull. So talk to me about your THP reduction strategies. It's certainly
it's not going to be anything ground changing. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely right when we started ramping up everything, it was at that place in the industry where all of a sudden it seemed like people had just discovered THP, but it was probably just because of the mass increase in that kind of beer production. And yeah, we had really, really bad problems with it. Like I said, we would have to let bottles condition 6 to 12 months to kind of scrub that out. And it would always scrub out. The Brettanomyces would always convert it locally. And we would never release beer that had that in it or in it on a sensory level. The things that we've found recently to really counteract that, we switched to bottle conditioning with CBC1, which is a bottle conditioning yeast. We were trying to bottle condition with Brettanomyces for a long time, and I think that was just taking a lot longer. That bottle conditioning yeast kind of just quicker acting, kind of scrubs the oxygen out of the bottle, I think, quicker than Brettanomyces was. And we're just pitching a lot more yeast than we were at bottle conditioning. And just being way more mindful of keeping everything as oxygen free as possible. We have a very elementary bottling setup for that side of the business, which you probably a lot of people have seen, just the gravity fill head, which is impossible to keep oxygen free, unfortunately. But yeah, those two, just pitching a lot of yeast and switching that yeast strain up for bottle conditioning has really, really made an impact.
Makes sense. Is there any other interesting piece of your mixed fermentation process that was kind of an aha moment for you all, where you discovered something that improved the overall process?
Oh man, I don't know if it's a aha moment, but I've found that I think any mixed culture beer should be dry hopped, even if it's like tiny bit. It just does something to the head retention and just really adds an extra layer to the beer. Even if it's like just a Saaz, like tiny dry hop, I think really improves those beers.
Interesting. Just from a kind of textural and functional standpoint, not even flavor.
Yeah, definitely.
Huh. Well, Matt, as we zoom out, what's obviously the last couple of years have put Door County and Hacienda, through some changes. Every brewing in business has gone through changes over the last couple of years, even, whether you wanted to or not. People have taken stock, employees are changing, people move around, people have decided to leave the industry sometimes. Consumers change the way they interact with your brand and the way that they consume beer. It's been a whole period of people trying to figure things out, and we're not through it yet. Obviously, we're still seeing, we're on the tail end of, or I guess we're at the end of this plateau of Omicron, thank God, where it seems like the new caseloads are going down, and hopefully we can get through this period of people just being sick and not being able to work or go out. Even if the death rates are, as a percentage of people being sick have declined because this is a less deadly variant and plus more people are vaccinated. It's still had this effect. This has been a terrible January in the sense that you layer dry January on top of a COVID spike, which has both taken employees out and meant that breweries couldn't even be open because they didn't have enough employees to be open. And then you also have customers who don't want to go out or go anywhere because of all of that. I mean, it's really just this perfect, crazy, terrible storm, and my heart goes out to everyone in the brewing industry that has to deal with that. We've had to deal with it here, even in our own office, and I think at least 80% of our staff, even though everyone is vaccinated and boosted, 80% came down with COVID, and we've just had, we've had to close the office here and there just because there was nobody here and nobody could, anyway, crazy times. We're all trying to navigate through all of this and deal with whatever the current situation is. Current situation is changing week to week even. Even within this context, if we pull back out from that, what's the near-term and long-term goal for Door County and for Hacienda? What do you all hope to achieve? And what does success mean for you all? When will you know that you all have found it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short-term goal is definitely just getting things back to normal. We've been hit. We've been pretty lucky. Our brew staff particularly has been, only one person has gotten COVID, which is a shock. But yeah, long term, I think for both companies, I hear this a lot on the podcast, but I agree with it. A lot is just getting all our employees kind of to a place where they love coming into work every day. They're really behind both brands and kind of the direction the company is heading. And yeah, just as a company as a whole, like all employees are at a place that they just are really, really happy and really just enjoy working with one another, and love the product they're serving. It's the tap room. I think that's the long-term goal for sure.
Well, fantastic. And that brings us to a close for this episode 223. G&D Chillers is the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. The Malt House by RAR is your online source for cool and exclusive RAR Malting Company gear. Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends mimic straight concentrates, but at a better price point. Get detailed insight into your fermentations with Brew Monitor, risk-free. Put SS Brewtech's advances to work in your brew house and sign up today for 5-Star Chemicals Homebrew Club program. As always, if you've enjoyed this podcast and you listen to it regularly or even only listen to it sporadically, we would love your support. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and you can do things like pop back into our archive of content on the Craft Beer and Brewing app and read that 2016 breakout brewer on the early days of Door County. And of course, also access, as only subscribers can, the Beersmith and XML files for the recipe from Door County for a New England style IPA. It's going to be funny to look back at those recipes now as they are vintage. Like, what's the 5-year-old New England IPA recipe?
I'm going to go look that up because, man, it's pretty.
How does that compare to it now, right?
It was probably based on Punk Ass Cat, I would guess, which was kind of a pre-Hacienda beer. But yeah.
I bet it is. Well, I'll send you a link and we can talk about that offline after the podcast. Matt, if people want to learn more about Hacienda and Door County Brewing, where do they find you guys out there on the internet and in real life?
Yeah, so online, Instagram is definitely the best place to engage with us, at Hacienda Beer Co. and Door County Brewing Co. Those same handles are the websites. And then we have a tap room in Bailey's Harbor up here, right in Door County, and then Hacienda tap room in Milwaukee.
Northeast of Green Bay, right?
Yep. Yeah. Beautiful area in the summer. It's frigid in the winter, but it's beautiful in the winter too. But yeah, the Hacienda North Avenue tap room in Milwaukee, in the east side. Really beautiful space down there.
Fantastic. Definitely check it out. Matt Sampson, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jamie. Really appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.